We will now move on to a topic that I think is very important for you to know and be able to convey to as many people as possible, because it is conclusive proof that human rights organizations have cooperated and are cooperating with a murderous terrorist organization like Hamas. Internal documents of Hamas's security apparatus in the Gaza Strip, exposed and analyzed by the Research Institute NGO Monitor, describe a comprehensive, systematic, years-long picture of infiltration, control, and espionage within international aid organizations operating in the Gaza Strip. Among the organizations are Doctors Without Borders, Oxfam, Save the Children, the Norwegian Refugee Council, NRC, Mercy Corps, ANERA, and many others. The documents originating from Hamas's Ministry of Interior and National Security and the internal security mechanisms in Gaza provide a rare glimpse into Hamas's mechanism of control over the humanitarian aid system and the quiet cooperation that aid organizations have maintained with it for years. One of the most prominent findings in the documents is a network of 55 coordinators who are actually senior Palestinian employees inside 48 foreign organizations. These are approved by Hamas and tasked with serving as a direct liaison cell between the organization and the leadership of the aid organizations. Hamas defines them in its documents as assets that can be exploited for security purposes to penetrate foreign NGOs, their senior foreign staff, and their movements on the ground. And according to the organization's instructions, the coordinators must hold senior positions, including director, deputy director, and chair of the board, in order to ensure access to the highest management levels and to crucial projects. An internal document from December 2022 reveals that at least 10 of the coordinators are directly identified with Hamas, and some are members of the movement, while others are former activists or employees in Hamas institutions. Amongst notable cases, the director of MAP UK in Gaza is defined as an operative in the Izz ad-Din al-Qassam brigades. The director of Human Appeal in Gaza belongs to the Hamas movement. The CEO of Sivatas operates within the movement's Dawa groups since the first Intifada, popular uprising against Israel. The director of IMC in Gaza holds the rank of Nakib, equivalent to an officer within Hamas. A coordinator in the American organization CRS is identified with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine group, which took part in the October 7th massacre. The documents reveal a comprehensive surveillance apparatus that Hamas operates against employees of international organizations, including the collection of personal data, political background, religious society ties, correspondence, and conduct on social media networks. It also includes phone investigations and the confiscation of embarrassing personnel photos. There were also reports that were made about non-cooperating employees, including notes such as, his level of religious observance is low. He might be a communist. He leaves home dressed immodestly. Or they have been in an immoral relationship. All of this serves as a blackmail apparatus that enables Hamas to bend employees who refuse to cooperate, and at the same time, employees sheltering under pressure exerted by the organization are documented. And for instance, an NRC employee who, according to the documents, was caught with private photos of another employee, a senior figure at Oxfam classified as a threat due to being Jewish, and coordinators defined as moral suspects on the basis of rumors and personal information. The documents show that all organizations operating in Gaza must maintain constant contact with Hamas's Ministry of Interior and the Ministry of Social Development under its control, and are not permitted to operate projects without the organization's approval. And furthermore, according to the documents, Hamas imposes compulsory financial and administrative audits, including demands for the transfer of full documentation. In addition, it acts by closing offices of organizations that do not cooperate. For example, the IMC office was closed for a week after the NGO refused to transfer reports, and ANERA was forced to undergo an audit after prolonged resistance, during which numerous financial violations were found. One of the most serious developments appearing in the documentation is the use of beneficiary lists that were prepared by Hamas itself, and many of them were used by international organizations and even the United Nations without further vetting. Thus, the terrorist organization ensures that financial aid and food are channeled to the activists intended with it, to families that Hamas wishes to reward, to areas with military priority. A document from June 2021 reveals how Hamas closely tracked an Oxfam water project in a sensitive border area. And according to the report, it is an area of security importance on both sides of the border. Also, the fruit trees in the area serve as cover for resistance activities. The executing company, Rai Consult, constitutes a founders and employees identified with Hamas, and all employees that are classified in the document received a rating of excellent in moral and security terms, so to speak. Hamas even changed the project's characteristics to suit its military needs, using civilian infrastructure as cover for military assets. In additional cases, Hamas demanded that deletion of questions from surveys conducted as part of humanitarian projects in order to prevent the exposure of terror infrastructure or the identification of Hamas operatives. And according to the NGO Monitor, the international aid organizations operating in the Gaza Strip are well aware of the cohesive conditions and Hamas's control, but do not report this. At times, they even adopt some of the narratives that serve Hamas in the international arena. Instead of exposing the depth of the penetration, some organizations tend to blame Israel for so-called delays, restrictions, or logistical difficulties. And thus, the report claims that provide Hamas with a public safety net and burnished its image. Professor Gerald Steinberg, founder and president of the NGO Monitor, says that the exposure of the documents comes at a time when the international aid community is planning to inject billions of dollars into Gaza's reconstruction. According to him, governments and international organizations intend to cooperate with a range of NGOs to rebuild infrastructure, provide municipal services, and disrupt grants and payments, distribute them. So we now know which organizations and local associations support Hamas's terrorist regime. We call on the government of Israel and the IDF to thoroughly examine the activities of the organization that will be permitted to provide aid to the Gaza Strip. So as you can see, Hamas is a terrorist organization that certainly does not act foolishly and leverages power capabilities against Israel. Therefore, we must fight the lies and defeat the terror of the Hamas terrorist organization. And we will do that with you.
Hamas kept very careful records of its relations with the dozens of humanitarian aid organizations that worked in Gaza. We're talking about documents that covered the years from roughly 2018, 2019 through just before October 7th. And it has a record of the contacts with, the communications with, and most importantly, what they called guarantors. Guarantors in the sense that these were Hamas people who worked within the organizations, like Doctors Without Borders, like the Norwegian Refugee Council, like Oxfam. We have over examples from 55 different NGOs, many of them well-known, very powerful, very influential, highly respected, that knew and cooperated directly with Hamas in terms of coordination. There were instances, for example, where the NGOs were working with specific frameworks and individuals in Gaza. And one of them would say, well, you notice that my floors are wobbling. Is that maybe tunneling underneath? And they have that recorded in the Hamas documents. They record each of the individuals that they worked with and the NGO connections, and whether those people were reliable, were they members of Hamas? Some of them had military terrorist ranks in them. So you see a very, very broad orchestrated coordination between Hamas and these so-called highly respected international aid groups. And it really focuses on the absolute need to immediately review how these organizations and in part the government funders are working with Hamas to prevent that from happening again during the reconstruction and the post-war period.
Professor Steinberg, what does this mean for international aid efforts and the billions that are planned for Gaza's reconstruction?
I think the big question here is whether it's an industry. It's a multi-billion-dollar aid industry. Just to give you some examples, the organization Doctors Without Borders, Medicine Sans Frontières, has a budget of $2.4 billion. And Oxfam has over $500 million. Huge amounts of money. The entire industry, when it works in terror-controlled areas like Gaza, needs to completely change its operational process. It can no longer be allowed to work closely with the terrorists, to coordinate with the organizations. Say, well, how are we going to help the poor people, the poor starving people? We're a humanitarian aid group. We have to work with the powers. If they're terrorist groups, we don't care. Jan Engeland, the head of Norwegian Refugee Council, has said that many times in public frameworks. He tells the government, don't restrict our activities. If we need to work with terrorists, we'll work with terrorists. That absolutely needs to stop. It's up to the governments. Many of these, or in fact, I think almost all the organizations get very significant funding from governments. They're called NGOs, but they are in fact GONGOs, government, non-governmental organizations. The governments need, in each case, all the European governments, Canada, Australia, of course, the United States, need to impose on these organizations rules and regulations and implementation to make sure that oversight, so that they don't continue this kind of behavior, because we saw the results of the aid. The aid went to build these huge complexes of terror tunnels. They helped pay salaries for the large terror organizations. That has to stop.